The strangest part wasn't that my family had removed me from the photo album. It was how naturally they smiled without me in it. I came home from a 5-day business conference in Denver on a cold Thursday evening in November. The Connecticut air smelled like rain and wet leaves as I pulled my suitcase up the stone walkway toward the house I had lived in for 32 years. My lower back ached from the flight, and all I could think about was changing into my old flannel robe, making a cup of chamomile tea, and sitting quietly in the living room. The porch light was already on when I arrived, casting a warm golden glow over the front door. For a moment, everything looked normal, peaceful, familiar. I remember smiling to myself as I unlocked the door, expecting to hear Emma laughing upstairs or Olivia talking loudly on the phone in the kitchen. Instead, the house felt strangely still. Not empty, just different. Like walking into a hotel room designed to look like your home. I set my suitcase beside the staircase and noticed the scent immediately. Vanilla candles. Olivia always burned those when guests came over. My eyes drifted toward the living room coffee table, where a large white photo album rested neatly in the center beside a bowl of decorative pine cones. Gold lettering stretched across the front cover. Our family through the years. I frowned slightly. I hadn't seen that album before. Slowly, I walked over and sat down on the edge of the couch. The leather creaked softly beneath me. I ran my fingers across the smooth cover and opened the first page. At first, I thought I was tired from traveling. The very first photograph showed Jason and Olivia standing in front of our lake house in Maine 15 years ago. Except I remembered taking that picture. I had been standing right beside Jason with my arm around his shoulder. Now there was only empty space beside him. I blinked hard and turned the page. Another photo. Christmas morning 2014. Emma opening the dollhouse I spent 3 months saving up to buy her. Olivia sat on the floor smiling beside her. Jason held wrapping paper in his lap. And me? Gone. My hands began to tremble slightly as I flipped faster. Through the pages. Birthday dinners. Thanksgiving. Graduation ceremonies. Family barbecues. Vacations. In every single photograph I had disappeared. Sometimes there was an awkward empty gap where my body used to be. Other times the image had been cropped so tightly it looked as if I had never been there at all. My throat tightened. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway behind me. Tick, tick, tick. The sound suddenly felt unbearably loud. Then I reached the final pages. My breath caught in my chest. It was a photograph from my 40th wedding anniversary party. The last anniversary Richard and I celebrated before his heart attack. White roses lined the ballroom tables. I remembered the exact song playing when the photo was taken. Richard had his arm around me while we laughed at something Emma said. Except now Olivia stood where I used to be, wearing a pale blue dress almost identical to the one I had worn that night. My face had been replaced so seamlessly it looked real at first glance. I stared at the picture so long my vision blurred. Upstairs, I heard footsteps moving across the floorboards. Olivia's voice drifted faintly down the hallway, calm and cheerful, as if nothing in the world had changed. But sitting there with that album in my lap, I realized something cold and terrible. They hadn't simply forgotten me. They were rewriting the story of this family, as if I had never belonged to it in the first place. I closed the album slowly and placed it back on the coffee table exactly where I had found it. My reflection stared back at me faintly from the dark living room window. Tired eyes. Silver hair flattened from traveling. A woman who suddenly felt like a visitor inside her own home. Upstairs, a door opened and closed. Then Emma laughed softly at something. The sound used to warm me. That night, it only deepened the strange hollow feeling spreading through my chest. I stood up carefully and rolled my suitcase toward the stairs. Halfway up, I noticed the framed photographs lining the hallway had changed. At first glance, they looked identical to the ones that had hung there for years. Same black frames. Same family vacations. Same smiling faces. But now the spaces where I once stood had been adjusted. In one picture from Cape Cod, Jason and Emma stood together near the water with the lighthouse behind them. I remembered Olivia complaining that the wind ruined her hair, so I had stepped out of the frame to take the photo myself. Yet somehow the image now showed Olivia standing beside them instead. Perfectly lit. Perfectly placed. Another frame showed Christmas morning from 3 years ago. Emma sat on Richard's lap beside the fireplace while snow covered the windows outside. Richard had wrapped his arm around me in the original photograph. Now only the sleeve of his sweater remained visible near the edge, awkwardly cropped. I stopped walking and stared at it for several seconds. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the soft ticking of the hallway clock. I suddenly realized I could not remember the last time anyone had taken a photograph with me on purpose. Not accidentally in the background. Not holding someone's coat or serving dinner. Actually with me. Inside my bedroom, things felt even stranger. My floral reading chair had been moved from the corner beside the window. In its place stood a tall cream-colored floor lamp I had never seen before. The framed photograph of Richard on my nightstand was gone entirely. I opened the top drawer, expecting to find it safely tucked away. Instead, I found neatly folded guest towels. Guest towels. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath my weight with a familiar creak, but even that sound felt distant now, like an echo from another person's life. A few minutes later, Olivia appeared in the doorway carrying a basket of freshly folded laundry. She smiled warmly the moment she saw me. Too warmly. "Helen, you are finally home," she said brightly. "How was Denver?" I studied her face carefully. Her blonde hair was perfectly curled, and her cream sweater looked untouched by real life. Not a wrinkle anywhere. "Long," I answered quietly. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the hallway downstairs where the album still sat on the coffee table. "Oh good," she said quickly. "You saw the new family album." I spent weeks putting it together. I nodded once. "I noticed. I thought it would be nice for Emma to have something modern," she continued while folding towels unnecessarily tighter in her hands. "You know how kids are now. They love clean aesthetics." Clean aesthetics. The words settled into the room like dust. She spoke casually, almost absent-mindedly, but something about the phrase stayed with me. Clean. As if I had become clutter. As if 32 years of memories needed organizing. "Well," I said softly, "you certainly changed a lot." Olivia smiled again, but this time the smile did not quite reach her eyes. "Sometimes families do that," she replied. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the faint scent of vanilla candles lingering behind her. Later that night, unable to sleep, I walked downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the kitchen, I noticed the family calendar hanging beside the pantry. Color-coded schedules covered every square. Emma's piano lessons, Jason's meetings, Olivia's charity luncheon, Thanksgiving dinner at Olivia's sister's house. My eyes scanned the entire month twice before I finally understood why my stomach suddenly tightened. My name was nowhere on it. I stood in the dark kitchen for a long time staring at that calendar. My reading glasses slid lower on my nose as I searched every square again, almost expecting my name to suddenly appear if I looked hard enough. It did not. The refrigerator hummed softly beside me while rain tapped against the windows over the sink. Outside, the maple trees swayed beneath the porch light, their branches scratching faintly against the siding of the house Richard and I once filled with noise and life and holiday dinners. I opened the refrigerator and reached automatically for the pitcher of iced tea I always made before leaving town. It was gone. In its place sat rows of identical glass containers labeled in Olivia's neat handwriting. Almond milk, green juice, overnight oats. Everything looked organized, controlled, sanitized. I closed the refrigerator slowly. Even the kitchen no longer smelled like my kitchen. The next morning I woke before sunrise out of habit. For nearly 40 years, Richard used to joke that I could not sleep past 6 o'clock even if someone paid me. I slipped on my robe and padded downstairs expecting silence, but voices drifted softly from the dining room. Jason and Olivia were already awake. I paused near the hallway entrance when I heard Olivia laugh quietly. "No, the navy ones work better," she said. "The other pictures still look too old-fashioned." Jason answered something too softly for me to hear clearly. Then Olivia spoke again. "I am telling you, the cleaner version feels more modern." Cleaner version. There was that phrase again. I stepped into the dining room carrying myself carefully, calmly. Olivia immediately brightened when she saw me. "Good morning, Helen," she said cheerfully. "Coffee?" Jason glanced up from his phone. For half a second our eyes met. Then he looked back down again. Morning, Mom. His voice sounded distracted, distant. Olivia stood near the table arranging printed photographs into neat piles. The moment she noticed me looking, she casually flipped them face down. Working on another album? I asked lightly. Just organizing old memories, she replied with a smile. I walked to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup. My hand stayed steady, but inside, something cold continued spreading through me. During breakfast, Olivia talked endlessly about Emma's upcoming school fundraiser and a charity gala downtown while Jason nodded absently between emails on his phone. I listened quietly, watched quietly. Every once in a while, Olivia would mention the family as though I existed somewhere outside of it. We are thinking of skiing in Vermont for Christmas this year, she said while spreading avocado on toast. Emma is excited for a little family getaway. A little family getaway. Not once did she ask whether I wanted to come. Not once did Jason correct her. The strangest part was how natural it all sounded. As though the decision had already been made long ago, and everyone except me understood the arrangement. After breakfast, Jason left for work with barely a glance in my direction. Olivia disappeared upstairs to take a phone call. I stayed behind clearing the dishes because no matter how uncomfortable things felt, old habits stayed with you. As I opened the dishwasher, I noticed a large white envelope tucked beneath a stack of magazines near the counter. My name was written across the front in Olivia's handwriting. Curious, I picked it up. Inside was a brochure for a luxury senior living community in Stamford. Elegant gardens, private dining, weekly social events. The smiling silver-haired couples on the front cover looked carefully staged, almost artificial. A yellow sticky note was attached to the brochure. Thought this might be a better fit for your lifestyle eventually. We can discuss after the holidays. No signature. No explanation. Just that. I stood there frozen beside the dishwasher while sunlight slowly filled the kitchen around me. Then upstairs I heard Emma's bedroom door open, followed by her small footsteps running across the hallway floor. "Grandma," she called happily. Before I could answer, Olivia's voice cut through the house sharp and quick. "Emma, sweetheart, give Grandma some space. She is probably tired." The little footsteps stopped immediately. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store mostly to get out of the house. The November sky hung low and gray above the streets of Westport, and cold wind rattled the bare trees lining the sidewalks. I wandered slowly through the aisles longer than necessary, staring at cans of soup and boxes of crackers without really seeing them. For the first time in years, I felt uncertain walking back into my own home. When Richard was alive, the house always felt anchored somehow. Even during difficult times, there was warmth waiting for me there. Now every room felt staged. Like I was walking through a carefully designed version of family life where I no longer fit the picture. By the time I returned, the sun had already begun to set. Olivia's white SUV sat in the driveway, spotless as always. Through the front window, I could see warm light glowing from the dining room chandelier. Laughter drifted faintly through the glass. I carried the grocery bags inside quietly and stopped in the hallway when I heard unfamiliar voices. Olivia was entertaining guests. Again. The remodel completely changed the energy of the house, she said proudly from the dining room. It finally feels cohesive now. Another woman laughed softly. You always make everything look so elegant, Olivia. I stepped farther into the hallway and saw 3 women seated around the dining table sipping wine while Olivia stood near the fireplace gesturing toward the framed family photographs lining the wall. Every single one had been updated, refreshed, corrected. "This one is from our trip to Maine last summer," Olivia said, holding up a silver frame. "It is one of my favorites." I recognized the photograph instantly. Emma stood between Jason and Olivia on the dock, smiling into the sunlight. The ocean sparkled behind them. In the original picture, I had been standing beside Emma holding her sweater because the wind coming off the water was cold that morning. Now there was nothing beside her except empty dock boards and ocean. One of the women tilted her head slightly. "Your mother-in-law does not travel with you much?" Olivia gave a small sympathetic smile that looked practiced. "Helen prefers keeping to herself these days. She likes quiet. Honestly, she has never really been the family photo type." The women nodded politely as though that explanation made perfect sense. I stood frozen behind the hallway wall, gripping the grocery bag so tightly the plastic handles dug into my palms. Family photo type. I thought about the thousands of pictures I had taken over the years. Birthday candles. School concerts. Soccer games in freezing rain. Christmas mornings before sunrise. Every memory this family owned existed because I preserved it. Richard used to tease me that if the house ever caught fire, I would save the photo albums before anything else. Upstairs, Emma suddenly ran down the staircase wearing pink socks and carrying a folder against her chest. The moment she saw me, her face brightened. "Grandma, look what I made at school." Before she could reach me, Olivia's voice interrupted smoothly. "Emma, sweetheart, our guests are here." Emma slowed uncertainly. "I just wanted to show Grandma my drawing." "Later," Olivia said firmly, though her smile never faded for the guests. "Do not interrupt grown-up conversation." Emma looked down at the folder quietly. Something inside me twisted painfully at the sight of her small shoulders sinking. "It is all right," I said softly. "I would love to see it later." Emma nodded and disappeared back upstairs. One of the women reached for her purse soon after, mentioning dinner reservations downtown. As the guests gathered their coats, I quietly carried the groceries into the kitchen unnoticed. From the other room, I could still hear Olivia laughing warmly. "We try to keep things very intentional around here now," she said. Intentional. That word stayed with me long after the front door closed behind her guests. Later that evening, while unloading groceries into the pantry, I noticed something else missing. The ceramic pie dish Richard bought me during our anniversary trip to Vermont was gone from its usual shelf. So was the old chipped casserole tray my mother gave me before she died. In their place sat matching white serving dishes arranged with perfect symmetry. Clean. Modern. Intentional. I stared at the empty shelf for a long moment before finally understanding the truth. Olivia was not simply redecorating the house. She was removing evidence that I had ever lived there at all. The next few days passed with the strange politeness people use around someone they no longer consider permanent. Jason left early every morning and returned late carrying the tired expression of a man avoiding something he did not want to face. Olivia moved through the house like she was preparing a magazine shoot. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table every morning. Decorative candles replaced old family keepsakes one by one. Even the music drifting softly through the speakers had changed from Richard's beloved jazz records to quiet instrumental playlists that sounded expensive and forgettable. I stopped mentioning the missing photographs. I stopped asking about the things disappearing from the house. Instead, I watched. And the more I watched, the more I realized none of this had started while I was in Denver. It had been happening slowly for months, maybe years. I had simply been too distracted by grief after Richard died to notice the edges of my own life being trimmed away piece by piece. On Sunday afternoon, rain pressed softly against the windows while Olivia hosted another gathering in the sunroom. This time it was members of her charity board. Women in cream sweaters and gold jewelry sat sipping tea while discussing fundraising dinners and social media campaigns. I stayed upstairs most of the afternoon reading beside the window until Emma knocked quietly on my bedroom door. "Grandma," she whispered. I looked up from my book. "Come in, sweetheart." She slipped inside carefully and closed the door behind her like someone entering a secret room. In her hands was the folder she had tried to show me days earlier. "I wanted you to see this before Mom throws it away," she said softly. Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. Emma climbed onto the bed beside me and opened the folder slowly. Inside was a large drawing done in colored pencil. At first glance, it looked like a normal family portrait. Jason stood smiling beside Olivia near the front steps of the house. Emma held their golden retriever's leash. Autumn leaves covered the yard in shades of orange and red. But then my eyes drifted farther left. I was there too, standing outside the house in the rain, drawn behind a window. Small. Separate. My chest tightened painfully. "Emma," I whispered carefully, "why am I inside the house?" She looked down at the drawing and twisted the sleeve of her sweater nervously around her fingers. "Mom said it made more sense." "More sense?" I repeated gently. Emma nodded without looking at me. "She said you do not really belong in the family parts anymore because Grandpa is gone now." For several seconds I could not speak. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows while somewhere downstairs the women in the sunroom burst into cheerful laughter. Emma glanced at me nervously. I told her that was mean, she added quickly. But she said I would understand when I got older. I set the drawing carefully across my lap. My hands felt cold suddenly. Did your father hear her say that? Emma hesitated. Then she nodded once. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Jason agreed, but because he stayed silent. Silence could become its own kind of answer after enough years. Emma leaned closer beside me. Grandma. Yes, sweetheart. Her blue eyes searched my face carefully. Are you leaving? The question landed softly between us, but I could hear the fear hiding underneath it. I forced a small smile even though my throat burned. Why would you ask me that? Emma looked down again. Mom has been talking about turning your room into a home office. The room seemed to tilt slightly around me. Home office. I glanced slowly across my bedroom. The missing chair. The missing photographs. The empty shelves. Suddenly every small change no longer felt random. They were preparing space. Preparing for a future version of this house where I no longer existed. Downstairs, Olivia's laughter floated upward again. Bright and polished and perfectly controlled. Emma reached for my hand quietly. I do not want you to go, she whispered. I squeezed her small fingers gently while staring at the drawing resting across my knees. Outside the window, rainwater slid slowly down the glass, blurring my reflection until I almost disappeared entirely. After Emma left my room, I sat there alone long after the rain stopped. The drawing rested across my lap while the sky outside darkened into evening. I traced the outline of the little figure she had drawn standing behind the window. Small shoulders. Faded sweater. Half hidden by curtains. It struck me then that children often revealed truths adults spent years trying to disguise. Emma had not drawn me outside the family by accident. She had drawn what she had been taught to see. Downstairs, cabinet doors opened and closed while Olivia prepared dinner. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifted faintly through the vents, familiar scents from recipes I once taught her to make. For years, I convinced myself that teaching Olivia family traditions meant welcoming her fully into our lives. I taught her Richard's favorite Sunday roast recipe. I gave her my mother's handwritten pie crust instructions laminated inside a recipe binder. I even handed down the pearl serving platter my grandmother carried from Ireland in 1952. I used to believe that sharing those things created closeness. Now I understood something colder. Some people collected pieces of your life not because they loved you, but because they planned to replace you with them. At dinner that evening, Olivia set the table beautifully. Cream linen napkins. Flickering candles. White ceramic plates that matched the remodeled kitchen perfectly. The old floral dishes Richard bought me for our 25th anniversary had disappeared sometime during the past month. Emma, elbows off the table, Olivia said gently while pouring sparkling water into crystal glasses. Jason barely looked up from his phone. His tie hung loosened around his neck, and shadows sat beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted all the time now. Not guilty, just tired. Like someone living inside a lie that required constant maintenance. How was school? I asked Emma softly. Before she could answer, Olivia smiled brightly across the table. Actually, Emma got selected for the Winter Arts Showcase next month. We are so excited. Emma's face lit up immediately. Grandma, my drawing is going to be displayed in the hallway at school. Olivia reached for her wine glass smoothly. The family portrait one especially impressed the teachers, she added casually. Something about the way she said family portrait made my stomach tighten. I looked at Emma carefully. She lowered her eyes toward her plate. That is wonderful, I said gently. I would love to see it displayed. Olivia gave a soft laugh. Oh, I am not sure visitors are allowed during setup week. The school has become very selective lately. The lie landed quietly between us. Emma looked confused for a moment, probably because she knew grandparents attended school events all the time. Jason finally glanced up from his phone. Mom can come if she wants, he muttered distractedly before returning to his screen. Olivia's smile froze for the smallest fraction of a second. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. Of course, she said quickly. If that works. The rest of dinner passed beneath the strange surface politeness that had become normal inside the house. Forks clinked softly against plates. Candlelight flickered across polished countertops. Outside, cold wind rattled branches against the windows. It all looked beautiful from the outside. That was the dangerous part. People imagine cruelty as loud voices and slammed doors. But the deepest forms of rejection often arrived wrapped in perfect manners. Later that night, unable to sleep, I walked downstairs for tea. The house sat silent except for the low hum of the dishwasher. As I passed the home office near the front hallway, I noticed light glowing faintly beneath the door. Olivia must have forgotten to turn off her computer. I hesitated briefly before stepping inside. The room smelled faintly of vanilla candles and printer ink. On the large monitor sat an open design program filled with family photographs. My breath caught. Folder names lined the screen in neat rows. Holiday clean versions. Summer edits. Legacy album final. And beneath them all sat another folder simply labeled Remove Helen. For several seconds I could not move. The room suddenly felt very cold despite the heat running softly through the vents. Slowly, I stepped closer to the desk. The folder remained open on the screen like something Olivia never imagined anyone else would see. Then I noticed one final document sitting alone at the bottom of the monitor. House transition plan. I do not know how long I stood there staring at the computer screen. The glow from the monitor cast pale blue light across the office walls while the heating vents hummed softly overhead. My reflection appeared faintly against the dark window beside the desk. Small. Motionless. Almost ghost-like. Slowly, I lowered myself into Olivia's desk chair and opened the document labeled House Transition Plan. At the top of the page sat a photograph of my own home taken from the front lawn at sunset. Beneath it was a timeline divided into neat categories. Renovation phase. Office conversion. Guest room expansion. Estate simplification. My eyes moved farther down the screen. November. Begin reducing Helen's attachment to household spaces. December. Transition social perception of family structure. January. Discuss long-term housing alternatives. I stopped breathing for a second. Social perception. A family structure. The language sounded corporate. Clinical. As though my life had become a branding strategy instead of a family. Then I noticed Jason's name beside several comments in the margins. Agreed. Makes sense financially. Easier this way. My chest tightened so sharply I pressed one hand against the edge of the desk to steady myself. Until that moment, some small part of me still wanted to believe Olivia had manipulated him completely. That my son was simply weak or distracted or grieving in his own way. But those notes changed something inside me. Jason knew. Not eventually. Not recently. He had known the entire time. The office suddenly felt unbearably quiet. I closed the document carefully and stood up just as footsteps creaked faintly upstairs. Olivia. I slipped out of the office, leaving everything exactly as I found it, and returned quietly to my bedroom. Sleep never came that night. I sat beside the window wrapped in my robe watching snow begin to fall softly across the backyard. The first snow of the season always reminded Richard of childhood winters in Vermont. He used to stand by the glass with a cup of coffee smiling like a boy every time snowflakes appeared. Around 3 in the morning, I finally opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside sat decades of family history carefully preserved in labeled boxes and albums. Original photographs. Handwritten letters. Birth certificates. Old videotapes. Richard trusted me with all of it because I was the one who remembered everything. For years I thought memory was simply sentimentality. Now I understood memory was power. By sunrise I had made my decision. The next morning I moved through the kitchen calmly while Olivia prepared smoothies beside the counter. "You are up early," she said brightly. "Could not sleep," I replied evenly. Jason entered a few minutes later adjusting his watch while scanning emails on his phone. He looked tired again. Pale. Avoidant. "Mom," he muttered. "Morning." I poured myself coffee slowly before speaking. "I have an appointment downtown this afternoon." Olivia glanced up immediately. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," I answered. "I simply need to meet with Richard's attorney about some estate paperwork." The room changed instantly. It was subtle. A stillness more than anything else. Olivia's hand paused briefly against the blender controls. Jason finally looked up from his phone. What paperwork? He asked too quickly. I met his eyes calmly over the rim of my coffee cup. Just old family matters that need updating after the anniversary of Richard's passing. Silence settled heavily across the kitchen for several seconds. Then Olivia forced a small smile. That sounds stressful. We can help if you need anything. I almost smiled myself at the word help. Instead, I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate. I am sure I can manage. After breakfast, Jason left for work without finishing his coffee. Olivia spent the rest of the morning strangely cheerful, humming softly while rearranging decorative candles near the fireplace. But I noticed the way she kept glancing toward the staircase whenever she thought I was not looking. That afternoon, I drove downtown through light snowfall toward the law office Richard used for nearly 20 years. The same brick building with brass doors and dark green awnings. The same lobby that smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. When the receptionist recognized me, her expression softened immediately. "Mrs. Carter," she said warmly, "Mr. Whitmore will be very glad to see you." As I sat waiting beside the office window, snowflakes drifted slowly across Main Street outside, while people hurried beneath umbrellas and winter coats. For the first time in weeks, my breathing finally steadied. Because Olivia had made one enormous mistake. She thought removing me from photographs would erase my place in the family. But she forgot something important. Richard trusted me with every original version of our lives. Mr. Whitmore listened quietly while snow drifted outside his office windows in slow white waves. He had aged since Richard's funeral. More silver in his hair. Thinner shoulders beneath his charcoal suit. But his eyes remained sharp behind his glasses as I explained everything carefully. The altered photographs. The folders on Olivia's computer. The transition plan. The silence from Jason. When I finally finished speaking, the office became very still. Mr. Whitmore folded his hands across the desk and let out a long breath. "Helen," he said softly. Richard anticipated something like this might happen one day. My eyes lifted slowly toward him. "What do you mean?" He opened a drawer beside his desk and removed a thick dark blue folder with Richard Carter written neatly across the front. About 6 months before his heart attack, Richard updated several sections of the estate structure. My heartbeat slowed strangely as he slid the folder toward me. Inside sat copies of trusts, ownership documents, property agreements, and handwritten notes in Richard's unmistakable script. Richard worried that after he passed, emotions and influence inside the household might shift, Mr. Whitmore explained carefully. He loved Jason deeply, but he also understood his son could be easily persuaded by stronger personalities. I stared silently at Richard's handwriting while grief moved through me again. Quieter now but deeper somehow. Even after death, he had still been trying to protect me. "There is something else," Mr. Whitmore added. He opened another section of the folder and turned it toward me. My breath caught. It was a legal ownership structure for the house. Richard's name and mine appeared side by side beneath the property deed. But attached beneath it sat a separate clause I had never seen before. Upon Helen Carter's permanent relocation, ownership review requires direct authorization from the Carter Family Preservation Trust. "What is the Preservation Trust?" I asked quietly. Mr. Whitmore gave a small sympathetic smile. "You are." I looked up sharply. "Richard transferred controlling authority to you entirely. Not Jason." The room became silent except for the soft ticking of the antique clock hanging beside the bookshelf. Suddenly, everything Olivia had been planning made sense. The edits. The manipulation. The emotional distancing. They could not fully control the house while I remained legally and financially connected to it, which meant removing me emotionally came first. Mr. Whitmore continued speaking gently. "Richard also preserved complete archives of family records here. Original photographs, video recordings, financial contributions, every documented family asset." He paused carefully before adding, "He believed history mattered." I closed my eyes briefly. Richard used to say photographs were proof that people existed even after memory faded. At the time I thought he meant nostalgia. Now I understood he meant survival. By the time I left the law office, evening had settled across downtown Westport. Christmas lights glowed softly in storefront windows while fresh snow covered the sidewalks in white silence. I sat inside my car for several minutes without turning the engine on. For the first time since returning from Denver, I no longer felt confused. Hurt, yes. Betrayed, certainly. But not powerless. The following week, the house transformed into a performance stage for Olivia's annual winter charity dinner. Florists arrived carrying white roses and eucalyptus branches. Caterers moved through the kitchen unpacking silver trays and champagne glasses. Olivia floated through the house dressed in cream cashmere, giving instructions with polished elegance while Jason handled guest lists and seating arrangements. By Friday evening, nearly 40 people filled the house laughing beside candlelight and soft jazz music. Local business owners, charity board members, social media photographers. Everyone admired Olivia's perfect home and perfect family. I wore a dark blue velvet dress Richard once bought me in Boston during our anniversary trip years ago. Olivia barely looked at me all evening except to say politely, "Helen, would you mind staying near the back during photos? The lighting setup is crowded tonight." I smiled softly. Of course. Later, as guests gathered in the living room for Olivia's presentation about family legacy and modern traditions, she stepped gracefully beside the fireplace holding a crystal wine glass. Behind her, a projector displayed edited family photographs across the wall. Clean versions. Perfect versions. Versions where I no longer existed. Family, Olivia said warmly to the crowd, is about choosing the future you want to preserve. People nodded approvingly while cameras flashed softly around the room. Then Olivia smiled toward the photographer. "Let us gather everyone for one final portrait." Guests shifted across the room preparing for the photograph while I stood quietly near the staircase. Emma looked toward me nervously from beside the fireplace. Jason avoided my eyes completely. Olivia lifted her chin elegantly toward the photographer. "All right, everyone," she said brightly. "Let us make this one timeless." And that was when I finally stepped forward holding Richard's blue folder in my hands. I could feel every eye in the room shift toward me as I walked slowly across the living room carpet. The music had already faded into awkward silence. Behind Olivia, the projector continued cycling through edited photographs against the wall. Smiling vacations, holiday dinners, birthday parties where I no longer existed. Olivia's polished expression barely moved at first, but I noticed the slight tightening around her mouth when she saw the blue folder in my hands. Jason looked pale instantly. He recognized it immediately. "Helen," Olivia said with a soft, nervous laugh, "we are just about to take the family portrait." I stopped beside the fireplace and turned calmly toward the guests. Candlelight flickered across crystal glasses and expensive winter coats while snow drifted softly outside the tall windows. Everything looked elegant, perfect, carefully curated. "I know," I said quietly. "That seems appropriate." The room remained completely silent. I opened the blue folder slowly and removed a thick stack of original photographs secured with paper clips. "My husband believed family history should be preserved honestly," I continued, "not edited according to convenience." Olivia's smile faltered. "I do not think this is really the time for—" "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I think it is exactly the time." I walked toward the projector table and placed one of Richard's original photographs beside the printed version Olivia had displayed earlier that evening. Gasps spread softly through the room. In the original image, I stood beside Emma at the main dock wrapped in a red sweater, smiling beneath the windblown sky. In Olivia's displayed version, I had vanished completely. The next photograph showed Christmas morning beside the fireplace. Again, the original included me holding Emma close while Richard laughed behind us. The edited version erased me entirely. Murmurs rippled quietly through the guests now. Olivia stepped forward quickly. "These are just design edits," she said sharply. "Everybody crops photos sometimes." I met her eyes calmly. "Do they also create folders labeled Remove Helen?" The color drained slowly from her face. Jason looked down at the floor immediately. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. I reached calmly into the folder once more and removed printed copies of the transition document from Olivia's computer. "House transition plan," I read softly. "Begin reducing Helen's attachment to household spaces. Transition social perception of family structure." The silence became suffocating. Olivia's composure cracked visibly for the first time. "You went through my private files," she demanded. No, I answered evenly. I walked into my own home. Emma stood frozen near the staircase, clutching the railing with both hands. Her eyes moved back and forth between her parents and me. Jason finally spoke, his voice low and strained. Mom! I turned toward him slowly. Did you agree to this? He opened his mouth but nothing came out. That was answer enough. I nodded once. Not angrily. Just tired. Your father spent his entire life building this family, I said quietly. And all either of you could think about was how to redesign it after he died. Olivia crossed her arms tightly. You are making this dramatic in front of everyone. I almost smiled at that word. Dramatic. As though grief and erasure were simply social inconveniences. No, I replied softly. I am simply restoring the original version. Then I removed the final document from Richard's folder and handed copies to Jason and Olivia. As controlling trustee of the Carter Family Preservation Trust, I said calmly, I have decided the house will remain protected under the original estate agreement. No sale. No restructuring. No ownership transfer. Jason stared down at the paperwork in stunned silence. Olivia's face had gone completely pale now. You cannot be serious, she whispered. Richard was. I turned toward the guests one final time. Family photographs are supposed to preserve memories, I said quietly, not erase the people who built them. No one spoke as I closed the folder and walked slowly toward the staircase. The room remained frozen behind me beneath candlelight and falling snow. Halfway up the stairs, I felt a small hand slip into mine. Emma. I looked down at her while she squeezed my fingers tightly. Behind us, the projector continued glowing against the wall, cycling through perfect edited images no one in that room could look at anymore.